it's too damn close.
To the edge of the universe and back. Endure and survive.
Excuse me?
Savage Starlight. That comic I've been reading, it's what the hero says after a big battle.
Endure and survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to another episode of Spoiled Games. We're going to be talking about one of the biggest games of the year, The Last of Us, which has received some of the broadest critical praise. It's a game I've seen not just this year, but in other years. Let's get to certain business first. The show is called Spoiled Games. We are talking about everything in this game. About The Last of Us. Play this game first. You really want to experience it on your own. Then come back. This video will always be here. So anyway, with that admonition, let's move on to our guests. We have joining us senior producer for Rev3 Games, Zach Miner.
Thank you, Adam.
And from Kotaku, Kirk Hamilton. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Let's first just mention for a moment, what did you expect coming into this game? It was Naughty Dog. This is a company that, you know, we've come to, on the technical level, they always deliver. You know, I think Uncharted 3 was weaker than Uncharted 2, but they have become one of, if not the preeminent developer of this generation. One of my biggest concerns coming into this game was those demos that we did see seemed so dark, so kind of troubling. Like, can I get through this game in a reasonable amount of time? And even though like I had to do it for a review, it didn't cause me as much psychic trauma as I actually expected it would. What were you expecting, Kirk?
Well, I actually stayed away from a lot of the sort of pre-release press and stuff on this game, and so I didn't know what to expect. I was really surprised. I mean, I was surprised by how kind of matter-of-fact the whole game was. It was so much less larger than life than Uncharted was, and much darker, and you know, I think emotionally difficult for me in a few different places. Like, it was really just a much more grim and then sort of self-contained story. So I was really surprised by all the ways it was different than Uncharted.
I think you mentioned in your review, and I concur, that, you know, the focus on sort of the humanist qualities of it, despite, you know, the apocalyptic, you know, this kind of global vision of what was happening. I think really that, I guess I didn't expect that, or I didn't expect it to be so effective, because yeah, there were just moments that were just every hair on my back of my neck.
You know, it's like that post-apocalyptic, you know, the Spielberg War of the Worlds, that movie?
Yeah.
What I always liked about that movie was that it's War of the Worlds, but you never get the scene where you're in the room with all the generals and they're talking about how, oh, they're destroying our forces, call in the tanks, and you never see that. It's just this guy like on the ground trying to stay alive while all this crazy stuff is happening around him. And I felt that way about The Last of Us 2. Actually, I could have done with a little less of the sort of, you know, newspaper clippings and reports that were sort of explaining what was going on. Like, we could have figured it out and left it a little more ambiguous.
Yeah, I was surprised by the year that the game took place in. I guess going in, I was not sure that it was 20 years after.
It was 2033, right? Like Metro 2033.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe over in Russia, they're all living down in the subway.
Right.
It's like the same thing.
Maybe it's canon. Who knows?
Maybe.
But yeah, that's what I thought was really cool. Was just, you know, they don't spend a whole lot of time setting that up, as you say. It's just like, yep, we're here, and this is what life has become.
And that was kind of the biggest surprise, right? I felt. So the game, I knew the game was going to be Ellie and Joel, and so it pans up on Sarah and Joel's daughter, and you're like, shit. Everybody played the game.
I mean, you know what that sequence is going to be. We've seen that many movies. I think one of the more effective was Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead.
I think they're really similar introductions.
But I've always been sort of affected by those, you know, immediate images of society collapsing all around you, and just that level of helpless interactivity. That I was stuck in. It took something that was very familiar, and yes, you knew that that girl was probably not going to make it out of it. But just even getting to the obvious, I found just it was pretty traumatic.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that's been said as people finally got their hands on it about that opening sequence, and to put you in Sarah first, and I mean, especially I just recall the driving scene, right, and the animations as you're moving around the car and you're looking at, you know, that house that's burning as you're driving by, and the family that you don't stop as you're going in here, and then you just see those people run out.
There's this there's a degree of subtlety to this game. I've played that intro a lot of times now. And there's just little stuff like, what's Joel's brother's name? No, I can't remember. Tommy. So Tommy picks them up and they're in the car and Tommy's talking about it, and he's really like kind of head up and talking about how, oh, they found these people like gruesomely killed in their house, and then Joel kind of is like, dude, like, shut up, because his daughter's there and he doesn't want her to hear it. And it's this kind of like little moment of Joel wanting to kind of shield his daughter. And then later in the game, there are these great scenes with Ellie where she comes out and there's like a pile of burned bodies, and he's like, you don't need to be looking at that. And she's like, dude, I've seen way worse than that. And it's kind of the same dynamic.
Yeah, come on, you don't need to be looking at that.
I've seen worse.
All right, then.
I think that kind of writing in this game is really surprising and helps the beginning, because it's such a cliche. Like, his daughter gets killed and then it breaks him, and then it's 20 years later, and like all of this stuff is really cliched.
But the way in which she is killed, I think once again, it took a very familiar, trope from sort of the zombie and probably like sort of larger apocalyptic narrative. It was who killed her. It was government forces,
Right.
and it really just kind of set up that sense of isolation that once you start the game proper inside of Boston, that for most people, there just is no good.
Right.
There is no authority. There is no entity around them that they can look at with any kind of confidence or any kind of trust. And that's just one of many instances in the game where the familiar is just altered so slightly as to kind of make it fresh again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is completely cliched in a zombie movie to have, the question, are the humans actually worse than the zombies?
It's another one. There are so many of them.
Yeah, but I mean, the way in which it's executed in this
Yeah.
is stunning. I mean, just the imagery of, the soldiers strung up, and, especially that one scene in Pittsburgh when you see the two civilians running and they're gunned down, and then the guy gets off the Jeep and just, shoots her in the head. I mean, just so gruesome and so effective.
And it is that sense of moral savagery. And the fact is, when you're looking at it as the player and you're seeing other characters doing it, and then you contrast that with what you're having Joel do in the course of it. And I think, and we can get to this in a bit, that whole kind of, I think, pathological fixation on survival, becomes this kind of way to indulge frustration and anger in these acts of violence, because it's not even so much, are we better than the zombies? Are they better than us? What is it worth living for? I mean, there's a very poor case to be made throughout the entirety of this game that just kind of giving up is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
They have that kind of whole partnership thing. I liked this theme throughout the whole story of sort of everybody in the game has a partner. So you see like Henry and his brother are partners, kind of, and obviously you find that he can't live with, what's his little brother's name? No.
Sam.
Henry and Sam. So Sam dies, and then Henry kills himself, and like can't live without him. And Joel and Tess, and how there's there are a couple of really great scenes between Joel and Tess where their relationship is kind of ambiguous. They're kind of probably sleeping together and whatever and shacked up, but it's not like,
You almost wonder if it's a relationship of convenience because they're in each other's company so much.
And they're both kind of assholes. Like, she's clearly like a pretty messed up badass. Like, she's not a great person.
That was okay. Yes, the scene of the girl was expected, and I think it did, make a case for there's something really messed up in this world. Once they confront in Boston the guy who screwed them over on their arms deal, the way she just, in two instances at the beginning and end of that, just cold-heartedly, she shoots first.
Well, and you hear, and you even the way you described it, it's like the guy who screwed them over on their arms deal. I mean, it's like, they're not, like she says later, she's like, we're shitty people. Like, we're shitty people.
That is a stupid idea.
So, as sort of the game progressed in the beginning, once you get a better sense of the Fireflies and what their interest is, I thought everything was going to have to revolve around, okay, why is Ellie so important? And that wasn't the most surprising revelation, but that was
a cliche, really.
That was, once again, but it was yet another instance of, okay, now I can see why I'm invested. But they sure didn't overplay the idea that she was going to be the savior for all things. The fact that it's Tess that seems to put more stock in that than Joel, I thought was a very interesting character choice.
Right, and then maybe that's only because she is infected herself, right?
Now, I still think one of the moments, and there's another one we can talk about, I think you've already mentioned it, but when Tess is going to die, and she's going to try to hold off, the do we call them army or police? I haven't decided in this. The authorities. And the way that Joel doesn't say anything, he just kind of looks at her and just turns.
That's a tough scene.
Yeah, and it's
she
just
yells
that
at him.
coldness. It's that okay, you can't, as desperate as people might have wanted for connection, and you can see that theme running through Bill and through Henry and throughout the game, but you get too invested in one person, and that's at your own peril because that's how you're going to die.
Well, and then Bill says that outright. That's like
Yeah.
the big theme, right? Is he's like having a partner in this world is good for one thing, getting you killed. Right?
That's one of the bits where the notes and the full understanding of the relationship between Bill and his
I
other
loved that
partner.
relationship. And Bill is such a weird like asshole, and their whole relationship is like, Frank, is that his name? Bill and Frank, and it's like kind of mutual hatred almost, but not really because he really cares about him.
Yeah.
I thought that was really great. Like, it's funny, we're talking about all this stuff, which is it's all so nuanced, and you never see this kind of nuance in games, right?
No.
Like, it's like just because Naughty Dog, and we're not even talking about the game part, right? We're really just talking about cutscenes. But because their cutscenes are so good, and the acting and the directing, the whole thing is so good, and Neil Druckmann, dude, like that guy's script is so good that you can discuss these kind of character nuances. It feels really cool to talk about a game.
Well, and one of the things that I really focused on in my review, and this I have not seen anyone other than Druckmann, really pull this off. Games are longer than movies. And there's certain disadvantages and certain advantages, and I think we've never really seen the advantages so invested in, where you can have that kind of subtlety of character development. That something as modest as when Ellie will say something, and then you see Joel just quickly look at his watch, and briefly.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
that
it's just
scene,
kind of like that.
That's like that great
That
scene.
carries
Yeah.
such wonderful meaning to it, where you can't linger for that long in a 2-hour movie. You gotta get business done.
Right. And a lot of games would be kind of much more obvious about it. I thought it's funny, because he was also creative director on Uncharted 2, and not on 3, I don't think. Which, 3 is maligned a lot. It's like not as
It's not
strong
the
as
worst
2, but
game
it's
ever
fun.
made.
But 2, especially the beginning of 2, I feel like you can see the dude's fingerprints on both games. 2 starts out with such a bang, like that whole intercut like tutorial where Drake is wounded in the snow, and then you're flashing back to like earlier stuff in this heist, and then they're back in the snow. Like, it's so freaking confident, and like it was like nothing I'd ever seen before playing that. And then The Last of Us throughout the whole game, I think, feels just as well wrought as that. So.
I mean, it's episodic in its layout, but you don't feel like, or at least the essentialness of having to have all these episodes.
Actually. I've been thinking about how I'm probably going to write something about this, so I'm scooping myself. Maybe I'll write it by Thursday by the time this video goes up. But I want to write a thing about that, about how it could have been an episodic game.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of comparisons to The Walking Dead anyways, to Telltale's game. Which, it's not, it's an interesting comparison. It's not supposed to be a fair one, but they're very different games. But I really liked how The Walking Dead was released episodically, because we could all play a section and then talk about it like a TV show. And like, we didn't have to do one huge spoiler thing. Like, we've only talked about the first half of the game so far, right? Like, there's still so much to talk about. But it'd be really cool if we could all be having that conversation over the course of the year and really live with it. And it does work episodically. Like, it's very, it's like a 5-episode game or something.
Can you imagine that second episode ending with Henry killing himself?
There'd have to be a next time on the walk, or next time on The Last of Us.
Henry killing himself was yet another one. I mean, there had to be you saw it, and they were telegraphing it. But then there's that beautiful scene between
like, beautiful,
Sam
right?
and Ellie, where they're talking about,
and
you start,
and she gives him the toy.
and they also start to talk about that kind of base philosophy, which is not so much are we worse than them, but on one level, are they better off? And that horrible idea, which does fly in the face of zombies. What if they're aware
alive.
and they've just lost all control of themselves?
Yeah.
And this whole idea, which I think plays very deeply into the end of the game, but whether or not there's a heaven where these souls are going. I mean, that whole idea, no one seems to be holding on to much hope, and as a result, holding on to much faith. They have that exchange about whether they're scared or not. And then the efficiency. I mean, that scene in All Zombies, where it's like, no, I know that person, I'm not going to kill him. That thing is dragged out. And here's a long game where they have the luxury to drag it out. It is done
in 30 seconds or something.
It reminds me of Boogie Nights, when the William H. Macy character at the very end, at the New Year's Eve party, it just happens with such kind of brutal quickness that I saw it coming, and it still felt fresh and rattled me.
Man, this might be the only episode that is The Last of Us and Boogie Nights spoiled games here.
We're just gonna spoil both of those at the same time.
But yeah, I mean, that moment, there was a ton of great moments before that, but that just, the immediacy of it and the cut to black, so impactful.
Henry, no!
Oh my god.
And it's the sense that I got, and I know Sony, this game was very it was too big, and they had to cut some stuff from it. At least I've heard that much. And if I had to guess where they were cutting stuff, I would guess that they cut stuff after Henry kills himself and before Wyoming. Because there's a whole, I mean, they jumped over the entire country, and then that was the only place where I felt like, oh, okay, that was kind of abrupt. There are the mountains, like here we are, we're in Wyoming.
In us talking right now, I do wonder though if it strengthened the narrative by doing that, because I think that you really have these two stark contrasts between sort of tone and the way that the narrative
And
plays
it was a
itself out.
long-ass game. I mean, it would have felt, if it had been like, it took me 14 hours on normal. If it had taken me like 18 hours or something like that, that would have been pretty long. Like, I'm not sure it needed another middle section. I felt like it got all the character stuff done that it needed to.
I agree. I do think that once we go to Wyoming, there were a couple sequences where it felt like there was combat for combat's sake,
Yes.
where it was not progressing the story, especially the moment when Ellie runs away and you have to retrieve her.
I'd say, yeah, I just played that again, and I was like, okay, this is probably the weakest, or the only place where it felt forced. And I kind of feel for them, like, I get it, and it's funny because I've made this argument, like, I've argued the opposite of this with Bioshock Infinite. I just felt differently, the two games felt different, what can I say?
Yeah.
But, like, that was one place where it felt like they were just like, you know what, we're making a game here, this is like a AAA game, we're gonna put some shooting into this part so that you have something to do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just gonna run and then they're gonna have a big discussion and then it's gonna, you know.
The battle that happens, and are we talking about what happens at the dam, or?
No,
After
when
the
you-
dam,
When you
so-
ride after Ellie and then like you get kind of ambushed by some guys in a cabin, and then you go to this big
that's right,
ranch
that's
house and
right.
you find her. And there's a
it
great
doesn't,
scene.
Yeah, it doesn't hold with the narrative. It's just like,
No.
why didn't they attack the little girl on the horse?
Right.
Horses
It just
now
doesn't make
stand
sense,
out in
like-
this world.
Right,
It's now
right.
replete with them.
When she somehow just made it by, and then meanwhile there's a ton of dudes, and then you get to the ranch house, and there's a great scene between Joel and Ellie where he's like, "You're not my daughter," and she is like, "I know about Sarah," and it's this really intense scene, and then they're like, "Oh, there's people breaking into the house, we better kill them." It's like time for another combat sequence. It's like,
But I mean, I see why the narrative kind of warranted doing something like
Yeah.
that, because that's the changing moment in Joel where he was about to dump her on Tommy and he wanted to wash his hands of it. And instead of having, I mean, you can't go through that and say, oh, there's the moment where he has his epiphany. And I'm so much more thankful they didn't do that. Because boy, is that cliche.
Right.
Then kind of this process where they get angry, he could lose her again. That's also one of the instances where I think some of the best ambient dialogue is available. They put as much attention there as they do with everything else. After they're fighting and you're searching around the house, you find one of the comic books.
Yeah, right.
And typically he's going like, hey, I got one of those comic books. And she's like, oh, cool. And he just mutters to himself, all right, I'll just hold on to this.
one
He
of those
still
books
knows
she
she's
likes.
angry at him.
Yeah.
Man,
No,
that ambient dialogue was some of my favorite parts in the game. I mean, I really loved that Ellie had never seen a world that was not in this state of decay. There's a moment after after Henry rescues them on the beach and they're walking along and there's like some boats that are shipwrecked and Ellie's like, so did everyone used to have a boat?
Right.
And it's like, what? She would have no idea, right?
She's like,
Well,
I've never been on a boat before.
But what's
Well, they're normally in
painful
the water.
with that one is that she can't even conceive of how populated the world was. That like she has zero point of reference. I mean, there's also the nice ice cream truck scene, but the one that really stood out to me was when they find the arcade cabinet in Billstown, and she's talking about the violence in that video game, which is such a beautiful way to contrast the awareness of just how brutal and unpleasant the actual gameplay violence is in the course of that world. But it's all those small touches, like once again, confidence. Like they knew
it's
exactly
very
what
confident.
they were doing.
And it's definitely the sign, I feel like, of a guy. I mean, so Druckmann wrote the script and was creative director and was there every step through the game. And that kind of writing, you can just tell, like the dude was in every meeting, he knew exactly what was gonna happen, so every time they changed something, he was there to change the script. And so as a result, it has this like kind of whole quality to it that a lot of games don't have, where you can tell, okay, the writer wasn't there for this, they had to change it, they had to bring in new stuff, they cut this whole level, now they had to change the dialogue again, but like patch it on, where this guy was like, I mean, just for all those little touches.
There's
you're
an
like, dude,
officiousness, and it's like, I think I can respect whatever sanity allows you to be so detail oriented, and yeah, the result is right there. Getting further into the story, I mean, once you get to the school, to the university, you have that signature moment. Joel, he could be dead, he may not be dead.
He gets crofted.
And man, that section. Well, and it's funny too because like Lara Croft went through it was like rebar.
It was rebar again,
Rebar through the guts is like the new thing in video games. She had the same thing happen, but she's like cool, right? Like very long after. That sequence, after he gets impaled on that thing, and he's limping through everything, and he's just wrecked, and it's going in and out, and there's that horrible keening note playing, and like that was one of the most like effective, like tense. That was unbelievable.
Something like that was used in Uncharted 3, but it felt like something to add drama to the story. Where here it was just like, no, I really thought this dude might die.
I was ready to play the rest of the game as Ellie, right? I mean, that's where I was. So moving on to that section when of course, Nolan North enters the game, right?
Right. Which I didn't know it was him until I read they had it on the embargo
spoiler sheet.
But I didn't read the spoiler sheet before playing the game, and then I played through that, no idea, and didn't see him in the credits, and then saw that. I was like, oh, he must have been that guy, David.
But yeah, I mean, once you get to that sequence, they're in the snow, and you meet this guy, and you know that there might be bad here, but it just won't. It won't resolve whether or not Joel is alive, although there's enough hints there.
Of course.
Why does she want medicine?
Yeah.
Why does she want
rule
all of
until
that?
you see a body.
But that led to I mean, I don't know if I've had a moment in a video game, period, that I've loved as much.
This winter, that's been especially cruel. A few weeks back, I sent a group of men out to a nearby town to look for food. Only a few came back. They said that the others had been slaughtered by a crazy man. And get this, he's a crazy man traveling with a little girl.
And it's just suddenly everything is on his ear. All these themes of the game, the sociopathy, the violence. That's why having a long game, waiting 14 hours and getting that kind of just humdinger of a comment. Anyway, let's discuss.
So I like that. I thought there was some stuff with him. Like, I loved that section. The winter was, I think, easily the strongest section of the game for me, just because they were playing with that split narrative and having Joel, wake up and Ellie get captured, and then he didn't actually go rescue her. She rescued herself. Then he comes and finds her, and all of that was like pretty masterful shit. Like, I was really impressed. I thought there was some stuff like, I actually would have rather that David, like, by the end, David was like kind of this evil, like, asshole who's like, questionably like into little girls and like maybe cutting people up and definitely cutting people up and eating them. And he becomes really crazy, and then he's hunting her with a machete, and it's like, I get that maybe he'd go crazy because she killed a lot of his people, but it would have been a little cooler if they'd been more ambiguous. There were some moments, like she overhears a conversation where they're like, get the kids out of here. Like, you can tell they have a whole society.
I mean, you get the sense it's kind of cultish.
Right.
He's been retaining power probably unfairly and unwisely. But, I mean, the cannibalism part, I mean, I felt it was deliberately invoking the Donner Party. I mean, I've now learned it's not just for California students. Barely all American high school and junior high students learn about the Donner Party. But you also get the sense that cannibalism is a point of survival.
Oh, yeah, right.
That this very thing that Joel is using to excuse everything he's doing is being excused by this camp of people. And how much crazier is he coming across than Joel? Yeah. I mean, I see what you mean, Kirk. That, like, he does get so kind of homicidal towards the end.
And they didn't need to. I mean, it's true that like Joel is also a homicidal asshole, right?
Yes.
Like, but so having that parallel between them works pretty well.
But I think that the way that sort of Joel is portrayed in that sequence, I mean, the screws that had been loosened seem to be just flying out.
Yeah. I mean, when we get that torture scene, that was like one of the grimmest torture. I mean, what's sad is we see a lot of torture scenes in games, right? And that was one of the grimmest. Like, it was really, really grim. Yeah. So,
I mean, I really felt that at the end of Winter, that it's like, well, they're not going back. Like, normal is gone.
Right.
Like, what they have just endured, like I think his trying to look at her as a surrogate for his daughter becomes much more challenging to do because he's seen what she is now capable of. I mean, I didn't see a huge ambivalence, but it did, it was definitely presenting Ellie as something much, much different. I don't know that, she's kind of a prodigy. I'm sorry, she's, her learnings from Joel have now demonstrated themselves.
I mean, I thought it was the first time he called her baby girl, right? It's like the same scene as in the beginning when he's with his daughter and she's dying, when he's with Ellie right after he finally gets to her. I can't remember if that's exactly where that is. But I kind of actually thought that was like that felt like the narrative climax of the whole story to me. Like that section where they're finally reunited, she kills the shit out of this guy, and he gets to her, and it's like they're back together,
he's
and they
comforting her like he
finally
never
like
has.
it's like right, like he's like,
Yeah.
I'll do anything for you, like you're my daughter, basically.
At that point, it's less than just a replacement of Sarah, but it's also of Tess, right? I mean, Tess had been a companion that he had been surviving with, right? And now she's proven herself not only as someone who maybe he loves and wants to protect, but as someone who can hold her own, right? And who can,
save
maybe
him.
survive
She saved
together.
his life.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
No, I mean, it's just kind of in a non-sexual way, conflation of both sort of his ward and his partner,
Right.
kind of turning into one thing, and that seems to elicit the emotions he's been holding back this whole time, when now he really does have to care for her. I started to toy with the idea just now that perhaps all the other separations between Joel and Ellie that we thought was kind of if not a contrivance, that something that was used quite frequently throughout the game, that he almost needed to go through that he needed some kind of strange baptism of nearly losing her to bring out that aspect.
Yeah,
of
I
himself.
definitely feel like that's how that played out. Like, it kind of took them getting to that point, and then we get the whole finale in Salt Lake City, which is kind of, it's definitely like, if the story is ramping up through winter, it's actually a down slope, and then it ends on this really bum note too. So I guess we should. I want to talk about this.
I mean, let's get to it. Obviously, he gets Ellie to Salt Lake City,
Right. And the giraffes.
Let's talk about the giraffes.
Let's talk about the giraffes. Maybe Jeff Keighley will watch this. Just about giraffes. Oh man,
I thought it was one of those absurdist moments. I felt it was invoking a little bit of 12 Monkeys.
Yeah.
But I
before
remember
you saw
that
the
being,
monkeys.
but the idea that I started to think about migratory patterns and sort of what they're doing, and it just reinforced, I thought, was that overarching narrative that the anthropocentrism, that, oh no, mankind is over. Yeah, but the world's going on. Right. The plants are growing back, the animals are there, and there's something beautiful about it, and it doesn't make man feel so essential in this equation.
Yeah.
You see this? Shh, don't scare it.
I won't.
It was a stunning moment. I remember. I was capturing it for video, so I stayed there for a while. But I just after.
Now you can just leave them.
Yeah, after going through winter, I just wanted to just stay in that moment. I kind of knew that something bad was going to happen. Of course, just given the tone of the game.
This game, something terrible is going to happen.
But that moment was just. It was a moment of beauty that I think has been rarely matched in video games.
No,
because of where they pulled it out of. Man, there was a lot about it. First off, it starts with her looking out and you don't know what she sees. So it could be like some soldiers or something, or you have no idea, or it's going to be all the fireflies. And instead it's a giraffe and you're like, what?
Yeah.
And then the music in that scene. Honestly, in general, that the music in this game is Gustavo Santaolalla.
Santaolalla or
I should learn how to pronounce his last name.
I'm gonna let you guys go with that.
Yeah. He's amazing. He's like Academy Award winner 2 years in a row. I knew he won for Brokeback Mountain, but also Babel.
And 21 Grams he did as well.
Yeah, a ton of great soundtracks and Motorcycle Diaries.
Well, and it's the restraint in that music.
And the music in that
it doesn't tell you
scene,
how to feel.
In general, in the movie or in the game, I just called it a movie. It's a Freudian slip. In general, in the game, the music did that. But in that scene, it's this Rhodes keyboard is playing, and it's freaking gorgeous. And then there's this great scene where it just stops with them looking out over these giraffes, and it can go on forever, and you just kind of want it to because you don't want.
And then what happens following that? I think it might be one of the most fascinating manipulations of the disconnect between player and character.
Yeah, no.
I became increasingly convinced that she might be able to save mankind, and I think I became more selfish to mankind. And even though I'm playing Joel doing these things, I'm like, I don't know
why
if
am I killing all these people?
Yeah.
I definitely did.
And then when you got into the operating room, I was like, wait, give me some out.
How many doctors did you guys kill in the operating room?
I killed one.
Just the one?
I killed all three.
Oh man, you're one of those.
I felt like if they wanted to do Joel, I'm Joel. And
Joel's just going to kill everybody.
I didn't know. I think at that point, it's like, okay, fine, we're going to save this girl.
Yeah. Right.
I kept running around for where's the triangle prompt? Where's the triangle prompt?
Any way I can do this without killing all these people.
What a remarkable way to manipulate game and your expectations of game.
Right. Well, and so so then you walk in, and I mean, that's probably the most chilling scene in the game, is the fact that you execute the brain surgeon, who's probably the last brain surgeon in the entire world, who's just trying to save everybody in the world, and then lie to Ellie. I mean, all of that. Where
And then the lying to Ellie.
Lie,
I found that that's where it started to hit on me. I mean, the fact that they've gone to Salt Lake City, and when you see the giraffes, you can see the artifacts of Temple Square and like all the Mormon temples out there in the distance. I believe that the hospital itself is Saint something, and I can't remember.
Like Saint Mary or something.
But it's like, well, yeah, the idea is that she's going to sacrifice herself for mankind. I mean, it's starting to play into the Christ myth. And then you have this almost like terrifying inversion of the whole thing, that his need for companionship, that thing that had eluded him so long, trumps that.
Right.
Yep.
And then
or causes him to trump
the
that.
fact that it looks like in that very final exchange that Ellie knows,
Right.
but she needs to be lied to. And that is, it's...
That whole final conversation,
just-
I mean, yeah. And that it was left ambiguous. I mean, dude, how many games leave their endings ambiguous like that? I mean,
Yeah.
that was, it wasn't quite the Sopranos ending, but it was almost as ambiguous. Like, it just, cut to black, credits, and there was no, like, I don't know, like, I thought that was really ballsy that they did it that way.
I think it played a lot into that theme of survival, that you need to start lying to yourself if you want to get by. Like if you've abandoned certain types of hope, I mean, you need to start spinning your own narrative to be able to find control and exist.
And they did a good job of that, I think, of like making me not like him. Like, I really think, like, at this point, like, I hope if they tell more of this story, that the story they tell is Ellie getting away from Joel and going and doing her own thing. Like,
I mean, Joel, I think, ends up being one of the most likable villains in video games, right?
He's
I mean,
definitely not a good person.
Yeah, and it's one of those games that, like Infinite, at the end you realize what the title is all about, right? I mean, it's like that is a choice that he makes is stunning. And as I was playing through the beginning again, the fact that he makes that choice at the beginning too, as they're driving by the family that has the child, and Joel is already, that's where his mindset is. Is he is ready to sacrifice others for his own.
And then it's almost like they took the game to get us in the same mindset. Like
Exactly.
And that really, so going back to talking about the beginning again, how it was this cliche and it was a woman in a refrigerator, but it was crucial for the whole story they wanted to tell. And like, it was a story about a guy when it could have been a story about Ellie, and it was like another daddening game.
But there is additional meaning you can do by tweaking, kind of the no mythology. I mean, as I said, the other thing I kept on thinking about was Don Quixote. And sort of the level of delusion that Joel seems to increasingly be under, and then it's all under this guise of survival and some kind of demented sense of nobility and familial, responsibility that just sort of guides them under one of the most, homicidal paths. Even though I think fewer people die in this and Uncharted by probably tenfold.
A lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you're making, we're drawing all of these hoity-toity literary, comparisons. But I think that The Road is obviously the one that, like, a lot of games are really into The Road, to Cormac McCarthy's book. That Ubisoft one, I'm Alive, and Enslaved, Odyssey to the West, which actually I think has a lot in common with this game in general. And there's a lot of The Road, like, people are always like to say that, The Road is I think The Road was really obviously a big influence on this game.
Oh yeah, I think in terms of a more grounded setting of the end of the world.
And the whole thing with just like a father and a child and like running into cannibals and just all of it, and kind of this road trip through the awful remnants of America, and even the naturalism of it, like, was very McCarthy-ish. I thought that was like another sort of thing they really stuck with and were consistent with throughout the game.
I would say, like, after talking about it for so long, this isn't a zombie game. I just can't call it a zombie game.
Well, and it's funny, right? Because it's nothing but zombie cliches, and yet it isn't. Like, Steven was just giving me crap about calling them zombies, because he's like, well, they're not zombies, they're infected. Just because I kept being like, kill the zombies, But I almost call them zombies, like, as a deliberate, like, middle finger to them for not being, because it's so zombie, but like, at the same time, you're right. I mean, it's that, I think the biggest zombie cliche of all is that this game is not actually about zombies, that it's a human story within the zombies, which is like every other zombie game. It's just, it happens to be a really worthy story that they're telling.
Yeah, I don't think that you get fatigue with genres like this when they're done so damn well.
Well, it's really,
right?
it's that art isn't the what, it's the how, right?
Yeah.
Like this game was totally the how. Like they executed it so well that it didn't really matter. It could have been Space Marines or
And the how is also the gameplay, which we have yet to discuss.
Right.
We're going to do that on our next episode of Spoiled Games, because this game is so comprehensive and so affecting that I think we need to give that whole aspect of it its due. So that will be up in the next couple of weeks. I hope you've enjoyed this aspect of it. I hope you have already played the game, because if not, we have really ruined everything for you.
True.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
You should read Kirk's review, because it's quite
make
excellent.
Sure,
Even though it has a
Hamilton-
terrible photo in it.
It does, it'll scare you, of the spider. But there aren't really any spoilers in the review.
Kirk
I guess if
Hamilton's
you already
review
watched it.
is up on Kotaku.com. Obviously, the Red 3 Games review is up on YouTube at Revision 3, many other places. Go check those out and join us again for Spoiled Games. We will have our same panel here. Can't wait to talk more about The Last of Us.